This is Joel Filliol. I'm the performance director of the Italian Triathlon Federation and coach of JFT Crew, and you're listening to the Physical Performance Show.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Physiocrem and Pogo Physio. I'm Brad Beer, sports physiotherapist and exercise scientist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, we'll aim to bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration from our featured guests, all designed to help you pursue and perform at your own physical best. Each week, we do this across a range of different episodes, including interest editions, expert editions, featured performers, and Coach's Corner episodes. And on today's episode, we're bringing you a Coach's Corner episode. That's right, it's been some time since we dished up a Coach's Corner episode with a very special guest, none other than Olympic Performance Director for Triathlon Italy and Elite Triathlon Coach of the JFT Crew, Joel Filliol. By way of bio, Joel is one of triathlon's most experienced and successful professional coaches. Joel has been involved in endurance sport since 1989, both as an athlete and as a coach. As an athlete, Joel has competed in over 100 triathlon and multi-sport events and represented Canada at World Championships in triathlon and duathlon. As a coach, Joel has worked with athletes at the highest levels, including the Ironman 70.3 World Triathlon Championships, the ITU World Elite Age Group Championships, and multi-sport games such as the Commonwealth, Pan American, and of course, multiple Olympic Games. Joel's previous roles include serving as head coach for the British Triathlon, working with athletes such as Olympic gold medalist Alistair Brownlee, Jonathan Brownlee, and Helen Jenkins. Joel also served Triathlon Canada for 2 years as development coach at the National Triathlon Centre in Victoria, before taking on the senior coaching role in 2006 through to 2008. Currently, Joel works in the role of the Olympic Performance Director for the Federation of Italian Triathlon, leading the program into the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games. But perhaps it's Joel's work with his elite private triathlon squad that is of most note. In 2019, in the World Triathlon Series, Joel coached his athletes to 19 podiums, 12 World Triathlon Series wins with 7 different athletes, 3 World Triathlon Series overall podiums, and the season culminated with the crowning of both the male and female World Triathlon Champion in Vincent Luis taking the male title and Katie Zafiris taking the women's World Champion title. Prior to that, Joel coached Spanish triathlete Mario Mola to 3 consecutive World Triathlon Series titles as well. There really is few coaches in the world of endurance sports that have such a track record as Joel Filliol of the JFT Crew. Before we throw into the episode, I caught up recently with freshly crowned World Triathlon Series champion Vincent Luis, and I asked Vincent what it was that made Joel such an outstanding coach. Here's what Vincent had to say about how being coached by Joel has been such an advantage in his professional career.
Training with Joel has been a huge advantage for me, and I think the biggest thing I learned for him is that he's really good to managing the egos and making like big egos training together, and also learning how the people react more than how they perform or how they're good at training, but just like reading the bodies of the athletes, reading the non-verbal aspect of the people. I think that's where he's the best, and that's what makes him a really great coach.
And in this episode, you'll hear from Joel around the principles that he believes dictate high performance. And if you're thinking that these would be complicated, think again. Joel's approach really is to keep things simple. As he outlines in this interview, simplicity really is the ultimate sophistication. Get ready to learn about why more and faster is not always better, why the goal is to make fewer poor decisions, why managing workouts when they're going really well is so important, why paying attention to athletes and their non-verbals is absolutely crucial, the concept of the minimally effective dose, why having the confidence to do less can be so important, and so much more. Get your pen and paper ready. Here is my conversation with coach of the 2019 male and female World Triathlon Series champions, Joel Filliol. Joel Filliol, JFT crew, what a year 2019 has been. So welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
Great, thanks for having me, Brad. Looking forward to chatting.
Joel, I grew up with only two career aspirations in mind. One was triathlon and the other was physiotherapy. So for me to speak with you this evening around the topics we're going to discuss, it's really like a kid in a candy store, Joel. So let's do our best to cover as much as we can.
Great, thanks very much.
Joel, let's start with the year that has been. You put up a fantastic post to bookmark the World Triathlon Series year. And I mean, the statistics from your crew, your private coaching crew, 19 World Triathlon Series podiums, 12 wins with 7 different athletes, 3 World Triathlon Series overall podiums, and culminating, of course, with 2 world champions, Katie Zafiris in the women's and Vincent Louis in the men's. So, Joel, firstly, congratulations, and you must need a good rest yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes as coaches we don't think about looking after our own energy, but it's been a process to recover from that series, the expectation and the ultimate outcome. You know, I tend to stay in the moment and again focus on really the coaching process every day. But it does take some time. I took most of September chilling at home, and since then I've been quite busy. But it takes some time to recover.
I mean, you started that Instagram caption with this: "Success is not owned; it is rented, and that rent is due every day." Is that a guiding principle, Joel, that you operate by?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can never take it for granted that we're going to continue to be successful. I think, complacency kills. So I think, how do we continue to improve? And I say that to myself every year, okay, we've achieved some things, but the world keeps getting better and we have to continue to get better. Every year and in every way. You
have found ways to get better, and let's explore some of that with this episode. But I like that complacency kills. Is that something you've had to learn, or have you always been aware of that?
Well, I think I suppose it's part of the culture, but my own mental model of high performance sport is, inevitably have this sort of doubt, and asking ourselves, are we doing enough? How do we keep getting better? And I think a certain amount of that is healthy and necessary. So I suppose it's my own experience that's led to that. It's not that I feel that I have been complacent in the past, but just that nagging feeling that I've got to get better, I've got to improve. Everyone's trying to get better as well. If you stay in the same place, really you're going backwards. So that's how I think about it, and I try to balance that doubt versus confidence, but I think thinking to get better all the time is really important.
I mean, it seems to be a healthy dose of doubt, anxiety around, whatever it may be, but it seems to be a real driver of continuing to stay at the pointy end, not just in coaching sense, but also in, for the athletes. I think it's that mix, as you say, of confidence and a healthy level of doubt. Yeah,
absolutely, especially in the world where we live in now, where you have access or know a little bit about what everyone's doing. And I came across a phrase of Stravanoia as a kind of paranoia of Strava. for example, and it's something that we face. I mean, years ago, we really didn't really know what other people in the world did, and we showed up and we raced, and the athletes would talk, and you talk to coaches. But now you're exposed to constantly what other people are doing, and it's a battle to maintain the right direction given that, and both from a coaching point of view, but I know the athletes face it as well, and they all have their own strategies to manage that. And I think it never goes away, no matter how successful you are, just that feeling of, what are other people doing? How do what can we learn from that, but also not getting distracted from that, probably more importantly.
Yeah, I mean, it is a different world in terms of everything, that the data are available. And in my line of work, Joel, we call them Strava injuries. The athlete that's wanting to keep up with, Tom or Sally. You called it Strava-noia. What are some of the strategies, Joel, you've seen, some of your athletes adopt that have kept them in the laneway of being healthy?
I suppose we have the advantage of this database of experience and success, so that gets the athlete sort of in the door, and as long as we're continued to be successful, we can come back to our process. But as I said, I think you never exit that point. There's no point where okay, now we've got it all figured out, and we don't have to pay attention to that. But I think the individual athletes, I encourage them the positives and negatives of social media, including Strava or Garmin Connect and Training Peaks and all these things. I think they have to find their own ways to filter that. It's something that it's part of the business of being an athlete, the business of being a coach now, that not everybody enjoys that, but many participate in that in their own sort of brand, if you like. But I think they've got to find ways to filter that, and that's quite individual. It's something that does come up, though. How do you focus on your own process? It's maybe a very basic thing to say and think, but the athlete's got to stay doing what they need to do and not get caught up in what the rest of the world is doing.
Yeah, you mentioned complacency kills. I've heard it said that comparison kills as well. Yeah,
absolutely, and I think that's where I've kind of got to in my coaching as well over time, of different models of thinking. And, more is not better, faster is not better. But actually getting the process and the loading right for the individual is where the art and the science of high performance is. And it's not easy. And for that reason I don't worry too much about the sharing and the kind of the openness that the many athletes also participate in. And also for myself, I've just come off speaking in a bunch of different contexts to different coaches, and I don't really worry about sharing what we're doing and what the athletes are doing, because in the end, it's your own experience and your own decision making, and every case is different, no matter how much we build up our database of experience. I like that concept of growing as many different experiences as possible to understand how are we going to make the best decisions. We never face the same situation exactly twice. So you're always thinking, what's the right decision in this moment, given we know about the athlete, the history, the current, what they're going through. And that's where success comes from, I think, is consistently making good decisions. And even what I've arrived at is avoiding mistakes. And those being the key moments are through the process of performance. How are we able to avoid injuries or just be consistent through the year? And I think a lot of it is making fewer mistakes, and that's not about, and again, it's not about going faster in training or doing more, or it's much more simple and basic than that, and that's where I keep coming back to, how do I do those things really well? How do I understand how to do those things really well and continue to do them really well?
Yeah, wow, Joel, there's so much there. What I've written down is learning how do we avoid mistakes, and then aiming to make good decisions, all off the back of this, as you termed it, the database of experience, which as you mentioned there, you can look at the data that goes up, but the training load, for example, is just one of these factors that dictate performance. So it's almost like you see the work, but good luck in trying to emulate it because you're trying to figure it out just as much as the person that's looking at the data.
Well, absolutely, and it doesn't. Again, there's no end point here. It's a continuous process of observing, thinking, talking, using the data that we have available to help make us decisions. But we haven't reached yet any one piece of information that will tell us what the right decision is, and so we have to use all of the elements that we have available to us to continue to make those decisions. And I often think it's easy to get decision fatigue in triathlon coaching because there are so many on any given day. From do we need to adjust the workout that we're doing based on what we see? Do we need to go faster, slower, more or less? These decisions are all around us, and I suppose recognizing what the really important ones are is part of. Comes from that database. What are the important moments, the key moments where you can move in a good way or in a bad way? And I recognize, the mistakes that I've made in my coaching. I can draw them down to particular moments where I perhaps didn't make the right decision or didn't manage the situation in the right way. And then we ended up, typically it's, mistakes are going to lead to health or injury problems. That's eventually what happens. It's not usually strategic or something else. It's that we end up with an injury or a health problem because we didn't pay attention or manage those key moments in the right way.
Are there any moments you'd be happy to share around, Joel, where you feel in your capacity, you made a good decision that led to X outcome, and then another time you made X decision that led to Y outcome? Would you be happy to share any practical examples?
The ones where I always struggle to manage are workouts that are going really well that end up going too well, that are really, particularly in running, it's where we're likely to have the most opportunity for something to go sideways, and the moments where I'm struggling. I always struggle to manage this. The workout is going super well. It's faster than we expect, faster than we need to, and now we need to put the brakes on. And because we're trying to balance that confidence that you get from good training and confidence that the athlete gets. It's a positive experience. It can be. But those are those moments when things are going really well that we can take a step too far, and certainly those are some of the moments when I reflect back over my career where an athlete perhaps was doing a super good run session, for example, and I get caught up in the moment, and instead of putting the brakes on, either I let it happen or encouraged it, and those are the moments that sometimes you recognize right away, but sometimes it takes some weeks later or even days later where now you regret taking that step too far. And again, in high performance, we're trying to improve. We're always trying to get better. The athletes are trying to grow what they expect of themselves and their own confidence, as I said. But inevitably, we need to be able to recognize when to put the brakes on. And over time, I've got more confident to be able to do that in the key moments. I think quicker to recognize them. And in our run training. I'm always saying, let's keep it under control. Let's reminding myself, but also reminding the athletes that we need to manage our intensity, and faster is not better, and more is not better.
There's those themes again, and so that's the converse of getting it wrong and encouraging faster, or encouraging more, or encouraging competition in training. But obviously, as you said, you've learned from some of those prior experiences. There's that database of experience again, and now you will, keep it under control. That's great, Joel. Let's go back to then come back forward to some of these coaching principles that have spawned such great success. You yourself were a competitive athlete, so can you take take us through the bullet points of the Joel Filliol story, the chronology, right through to current day where, you split yourself across a multitude of programs, including the high performance director for the Italian Triathlon Federation.
Yeah, I started, I'm Canadian originally. I started doing Kids of Steel races in Canada when I was about 11 or 12 years old. And so I started in triathlon, as opposed to coming from an individual sport. And I think part of what drove me to coaching was my own experiences of not exactly burning myself out, but cooking myself and being quite young. It wasn't like a catastrophe, but I certainly experienced some overreaching and some fatigue as a result of doing too much, which probably still affects me in the sense of how I think about managing training now. And I was lucky enough, just after Simon Whitfield won the gold medal back in Sydney, to have an offer to come out to the National Training Centre in Victoria in British Columbia. And that was my first real experience in coaching and observing Simon and growing in that environment. And that led to, after the Athens Olympics, to working with Simon as a personal coach and also as a national coach for Canada through to Beijing, where he achieved a historic second Olympic medal and a fantastic finish with Frodeno and Gomez and Bevan Doherty. And it was off the back of that I moved to the UK. I was ready for a change in life, and I took the head coach job for British Triathlon, and discovered after a couple of years that being a manager at that point of athletes wasn't what drove me and wasn't where I felt I had the most value. And that's where I started the squad that I'm doing now. It really started after the London Olympics. So I left the British Triathlon job, slowly started this group, and it really picked up steam after the London Games. And many of the athletes are still with me since the start of that, including Mario Mola and Tommy Zaferis, I suppose, still now as a photographer, but still he was one of the first athletes that I had in the squad now, and I suppose it was him that coined this JFT crew name. But that grew from there, and after the Rio cycle, had several opportunities, and I thought, for the sustainability of what we're doing, but also to have a value in a different way, to work with the Italian Federation, the opportunity came up, and really the vision was to bring the best in the world to Italian athletes and coaches, and have an integrated international environment in what we're doing, and that's led us to now, where I balance those kind of jobs. I often say, my main job is with the Italian Federation, and then my side project is this one where we're able to have this success as well. So I try to balance those things. I think it's a really good model to integrate both of those, and here we are. I'm lucky enough to continue to keep coaching. I like the expression, success in sport gives you the opportunity to continue practicing. If you win some things in coaching, you get to keep coaching, and certainly at a high performance level anyway. And although our sport isn't so brutal as football or some other professional sports where coaches and managers are sacked as soon as they start losing, at the same time, I'm grateful for the opportunity that I've had in finding a bit of success. I've been able to have new opportunities come my way, and that's the most interesting thing. It's what drives me. The relationships, the partnerships with the athletes, the working together to see what's possible, and that's what keeps me going and passionate to this day.
What jumps out there, Joel, is what a chronology. It's been part of your World Triathlon for those decades, and as you say, the success has allowed you to keep practicing, and I think there's a lot more practicing to come, Joel. But two words jumped out there: working together. From an outsider observing the JFT crew, intermittently been in contact with some of the athletes through my work with the Super League, one thing really, a couple of things, sort of themes, if you like, sort of I feel like emerge. One is the professionalism of the squad, and the second thing is the collegiate sense of we're in this together and we're here to help each other. It's not just about the individual. So from the outside looking in, Joel, it's a real credible, testament to the environment, and there's a leadership component obviously to that. So, what are some of the cultural elements that are important to yourself that then obviously feed down to the expectations of athlete behaviour?
Yeah, I think the first point is that an environment like ours, the athletes decide and choose to join. So they make an explicit choice, and they have to make an explicit investment as well. And I think in the Olympic sport world, where many athletes are given so much support, and they can end up with a kind of entitlement about what they deserve, and the level of funding, etc. And an environment like ours, that's inverted in that the athletes have to choose and have to invest. They have to reach into their pocket and pay for the support. And I think as a result, they come to us with a different mindset, with a level of autonomy. They've decided this is what they want to do, and this is what I'm going to invest in, and it's so powerful, I think. And I see that the challenge, working with the Italian Federation, but also because we interface with so many federations, it's the challenge to create that kind of mindset where the athlete takes ownership of what they're doing. And where I learned about that really was working with Simon Whitfield in the Beijing cycle, where it was one of those moments where it was the right time and the right opportunity. But Simon was vastly more experienced than I was. He's older than I was, for example, and I had to approach that relationship in a particular way in order to help him both reinvent himself, but help him find his way to perform again in the Beijing cycle. So I had to learn that way, and that's what I took with me to my coaching now, is this sense of self-management being a really important value, that the athletes, I'm there as a leader, a guider, and of course as a coach, but the athlete has to take their own responsibility for their performance, for their training, for their environment, and that self-management is a really important principle in our culture. We don't, I think of what is your culture? It's the behaviors that you reinforce, the behaviors that you tolerate, the behaviors that you reward. And, when I come back to, we don't reward, for example, racing and training with a lot of praise. For example, we discourage that. We reward being controlled and finishing the session according to the principles of what was the right load on the day is something that we would reinforce with positive feedback. And you might get negative feedback if you go too fast or you exceed what we planned. So those are related to the athlete learning how to manage themselves. So not everyone arrives in a different place regarding that. They don't, it's not a skill that necessarily it's not a talent necessarily. For some people, there might be a bit more talent to that, but ultimately they have to learn that. And I see that as a key part of my role, is how do I help them manage their own career, manage their own performance and their own process. And I can guide them in the right direction, but they have to take that step themselves. And so I think this kind of professional environment, it allows us to learn that, I think, faster than an environment where they're given everything, where where they can receive so much support and where they don't have to invest personally like they do with us.
The collegiate sense of teamwork and camaraderie, what are the key drivers or pillars of that being part of the culture, Joel?
Yeah, I mean, part of that comes from deciding who we're going to work with, and if you like, it's not exactly a screening process, but when I think of how do athletes decide, how do we involve new athletes, and typically it comes from conversations with existing athletes, and then it will be a conversation with myself, and I'm thinking, is this athlete going to fit with the way that we think and the way that we operate? Is it somebody that can learn how to manage themselves? Is it somebody that can manage their training or show that they can learn that? Is it somebody that thinks about things in the same way that we do? So they don't necessarily come with all those ingredients at the beginning, but there's a lot of it is who we want to work with, and I think we've been really fortunate, really lucky that some of the original athletes as part of this squad had a certain temperament and that fit with what I hoped we could build, but that's grown on itself. We have some great athlete leaders, and ultimately the athletes are the ones that reinforce this with themselves. Where in terms of how they manage their training and how they think about things, it's not just coming from me; it's how they think about it. And so when a new athlete comes in, we talk about the principles, but we learn by doing, and we learn by following the model that exists, and it is really powerful because, of course, we have some really successful athletes. So there's a built-in advantage there because the new ones that come know, well, I'm going to follow the model of these other athletes. So we have something that not everyone has, but we still have to reinforce that. We still have to pick the right moments to talk about the important things about how we work, how do we do things. So we come at it from multiple angles, but I think the culture is critical to how we continue to find ways to improve, but also continue to do the basics things well, to do the simple things well. And I, again, we can't be complacent about that, because in the process of managing your goals, your hopes and dreams, your ego, we want to improve, and we want to go faster, but we have to come back to how do we do the basic things really well, and the athletes have to reinforce that. I have to reinforce that every day. But I think we've got a really, really strong culture, and I can see that as well, because if I think you see it when you're not present necessarily directly. If, say, I go away or for a week or I'm not present, and I see that they still model the same things without me being there directly, and I think that I take that as a positive sign that the way that we do things is part and parcel of what the squad is, the identity. And and again, I think that underpins the success we've been able to have.
You're listening to the Olympic Performance Director for the Italian Triathlon Federation and elite triathlon coach Joel Filliol on this Coach's Corner episode. Support for today's show comes from PhysioCrem. PhysioCrem is a topical massage cream containing natural plant-based ingredients, ideal for the temporary relief of muscular aches and pains. If you're conscious of what you put on your body, you'll be happy to know that PhysioCrem does not contain parabens or hydroxybenzoates, and its non-greasy formula doesn't leave any sticky residue behind. PhysioCrem can be found Australia-wide at your local Coles, chemist or health store, as well as via their online shop. They've offered listeners of the show 20% off all products on their website, physiocrem.com.au. That's physiocrem.com.au. Hurting sucks, and PhysioCrem have got your back. Support for today's show also comes from Pogo Physio. We exist to help you get back to your physical best following injury. We want everyone who walks through the doors of Pogo Physio to complete their rehabilitation, get back to their physical best, and in doing so, cross their physio finish line. Our philosophy is simple. We do not want to see you for a session more than what you require to cross that physio finish line. To find out more about Pogo Physio's award-winning services, jump over to pogophysio.com.au. There you can find our 1-hour initial appointments or our very popular online telehealth services. But for now, let's jump back on this Coach's Corner episode with elite triathlon coach Joel Filliol. Joel, before we explore a few themes, I mean, for those that aren't aware of what a life in the year of the squad looks like, can you just paint the landscape of, the camp environment you've created and, sort of how many continents you might be hopping across in a season?
Our training season starts in a couple of weeks, and the last years we've started our year, if you like, in December with the first training camp. But as our athletes have grown with us, the first camp, not everyone comes to now. I think some of them benefit from a bit more time at home, a bit more recharging. So the first camp is a bit smaller. So I'll go off to the Canary Islands in a couple of weeks, and we take a short break at Christmas. But then properly it starts in January, and we as a non-residential environment, I mean, we don't live in one place, train in one place like a training center. We move according to what we think makes sense, and we have a kind of flexibility. We end up using a lot of the same places because it's easy or it makes sense. But we have a flexibility of where we go. So we'll start in January, and we'll do more or less a 2-month training camp until the first race of the year, which will be in Abu Dhabi, typically the last years and also next year. And I think just having that focus for that long period of time is really, really important, and just the consistency, for more or less 8 weeks, we'll roll through our program and build the first layer that will allow us to be successful this year. After the first race, we come back and we do it again. We'll build up again for the next period. So we go to a different place, typically in March, April, but it's the same thing. We'll be in training camp for the majority of the year until the grand final or the ITU final. We take short breaks, or depending on the region the athlete's from, they might have a very short break in May from the squad, not from training. But in general, we have continual camps through the competition season, as I say, from December with a short break at Christmas all the way through to wherever the grand final is, or next year it's going to be about Tokyo, and then the grand final in Edmonton. So we aim to provide that environment where we can do our best work together and improve as much as possible through most of the year. So it's a lot of time away from home. It's a lot of time for me away from home as well. But we have a support team around us. We have a full-time physio called Jose Miota, a Spanish fellow that's been working with us for a number of years and is really important part of our success. He's there every day with us and most of the training sessions, and he's providing that underpinning health support. And now we've got an assistant coach, an Aussie called Drew Box, who was racing and I was coaching for some time, and now has become a really important part of our performance environment. And that's enabled me probably to have a bit more longevity as well. When I need to get home or go to Italy for some meetings, then he continues to support our environment through those phases. So that's been really important as well. And I've also been able to use and leverage our partnership with the Italians in general for other support as well. So part of our role is growing other coaches, and so we've had a staff that can come through, and we also tend to train other physios as well to work with our model and thinking about how we think about high performance. So we've been able to grow that support, and I think that's been also really important. I think for myself as a way to grow my own network, and also for our athletes to have that consistency of support. So, and that's the way we roll through the year, and it's almost every year is a similar structure, but we don't necessarily go to the same places. So again, I think that flexibility to move according to what the calendar is and where we think we could benefit from, whether it's going to altitude or going to a hotter place or just a place that's familiar, that we can save energy in the way that everyone knows where to swim, bike, run, can also be really valuable.
Avoiding some decision fatigue.
Indeed.
Joel, you mentioned the model of high performance. If you had to give it a label, how would you label that model?
It's evolved over time. I think in the first cycle of my first, when I reflect back on the Beijing cycle, I thought the most important thing was consistency, and that's still an important principle. Probably even before that, I think what I realized in Olympic triathlon was conditioning, and really basic conditioning, fundamental, was how we were going to be successful. Not necessarily the most conditioned athletes, but we had to get that part right. So conditioning and consistency now are connected. Then I thought in the next cycle, into London and then Rio, getting the loading right for the individual. So I connect those three concepts now: conditioning, consistency, and getting the loading right for each individual within that environment. And now I connect that to the next phase is this concept of minimal effective dose, or what's the repeatable training load that the athletes can do that's away from the risk zone, if you like, or away from the limits, but they can repeat. And that's what I'm trying to find now, is for each individual, connecting it, the right loading at the right time, but also what's the minimum that they need to do? Because I think, again, where we're going to make mistakes is overshooting the workload that they can tolerate. And that's a moving target. It changes all the time. It changes based on stress. It changes year to year. You hope that it grows, but it doesn't always. It's not a linearly expanding principle for each individual. So I connect those things: the consistency, conditioning, the right load for the individual, and then what's the, it may sound similar, but this concept of the minimal effective dose. What's the right stress for the athlete that allows them to improve and avoids risk? And I think connecting all those things is it's evolved how I work, but I'm more confident over time with how we make decisions based on those principles, and to get things right. Our model is we in order to be world champion in Olympic triathlon, you have to perform well at least 6 races, 5 plus the final. And that's been the last decade, our model, to be consistent literally from a performance point of view. And I think what underpins that is having stable, consistent training. And how do you find that stability? The loading has to be right so that they can repeat it and absorb it. And again, we have to do that within the context, as we started to talk about, the rest of the world and what are they doing, and the doubts, how much do you need to do, how fast do you need to go? But we need to find that stability for each individual. And I think we have a kind of formula. It's not exactly what, you can't repeat it the same all the time, but I suppose all those things together is a kind of mental model about performance. And where it's different, I think, is it's really basic. It's something that is accessible to every coach. We don't have a big budget or a bunch of very specific support, or we don't have a bunch of sports science support. We don't have a sophisticated kind of program. I think. But I like to tell these stories because I think a lot of coaches think they need to be innovative. They need to be sophisticated. We're surrounded by new devices, gadgets, data, all of these things. And, we have to find sort of the wisdom amongst all that noise, because it's so easy to feel overwhelmed, I think, with everything that's out there in sport, and to try to find the simplicity, find the basics, find what's really important. For anyone, I think it's a message I hope that people feel is accessible to anyone. Again, you don't need to work for a federation or have a big sports science, sports medicine budget, or have all of the toys to find performance. I think, fundamentally it can be more simple than that. And I like to say that it's not easy to find simplicity. In fact, it's actually really hard to find simplicity amongst all of this, for all of these reasons. And the quote, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And then I follow that with, again, but it's hard to be simple. It's hard to do the basic things well. And I think it's just quite different than kind of the industry of high performance where it's going, which is the feeling you need to jump on whatever bandwagon that you find. You see all these things all the time that maybe they can help. Different ways of measuring things, monitoring things. There's an explosion in sport about all the things that you can do, all these things that in theory can help. But I think a lot of the role that I find myself doing with the athletes, but also primarily for myself, is to filter out these things. What can we really do? What can we implement with quality? And it's so hard, because I was experimenting, for example, with a kind of power meter for swimming last year, and I have this great idea that this is going to be a game changer for swimming. And you get into beyond the surface, actually to implement this well is really hard, and I'm not actually sure it's going to work, but we're going to spend so much time and energy investing in it, and we just don't know if it's actually going to make any difference, and it can become a distraction. And these kind of things, we have to decide what we can implement with quality, with consistency, and we're all limited. It's nobody can do everything. And in fact, ultimately with the athletes, they can't do everything at the same time, everything well. The more you throw at them, the more chance they get distracted, or we stop paying attention to the really important stuff. So all of these things I think are connected, but what drives me is doing the basics well, keeping things simple. What do I need to pay attention to? And making sure that I continue to pay attention to those important things.
Yeah, wow. Keeping the main thing. And I, in corporate settings, in high performance environments, sporting, there's been lots of talk for really some time about the marginal gains, but it always makes me smile, because I think that's fine and well, but as long as the basics, the fundamentals, I've heard you say, develop a deep aerobic conditioning, in this case, like the basics are in place, then layer those things on for sure. But the basics, keeping it simple. I read that, you would put on a caption, I think it was, Joel, your role as a coach is separating the solid information from the nonsense or the thoughtless opinions to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff, truth from lies, science from marketing.
Absolutely, and that is not an easy job. It's not an easy task, and again, we all have like a desire to improve. That obsession with getting better, and that's what we face. Is there's just so much marketing around what might help, and even we can spend our time on PubMed or looking at studies that come out of the sports science industry, but we have to recognize that a lot of that is it's not as solid as we might think. There's context and the ability to implement something consistently is sometimes missing. What is the opportunity cost of doing different things, and I think that again it can become a performance advantage to decide what you're not going to do. I mean, we know this also. I mean, it's probably in modern life, and business and being successful in anything, developing the ability to say no to things has become really valuable. And we know this in our, the constant competition for our attention. It's the attention economy now of, our attention is valuable, and nowhere is that more important, I think, than in sport and in coaching, is to what are we going to pay attention to, what really matters, and how do we not get distracted by things that maybe they help, maybe they won't help, but there's an opportunity cost to implementing anything. And how do we keep paying attention to the right things?
And, just practically speaking, Joel, what are some of those right things that, you as a coach do practically pay attention to day to day, week to week with your athletes? Is it their mood? Is it their, what is it?
It's how they're handling the training load, and in a holistic way. You mentioned mood, and that's a great cue, because with all of the scientific ways to measure recovery, we come back to these meta studies, meta-analysis that tell us that mood is still the most reliable indicator of readiness to train or recovery. And so I'm paying attention to how the athletes communicate when we're present in the same place, their body language, how they give feedback, those kind of things. It's the relationship side, it's the communication side that tell us how are they managing this environment, this training load, and therefore what changes could I anticipate needing to make, or what decisions might we need to make based on what we're seeing. And I like this quote from an American athletics coach called Dan Pfaff, who says, the most effective monitoring tool are coaches who pay attention, and with your eyes and ears, and yes, again, not discounting the type of data that we can collect, but ultimately you have to pull all that together and make decisions about readiness to train, about recovery. The eat, sleep, train. Can they repeat the next day what you planned? If not, what are you going to change, and how are you going to change it? And just going. That's our process every day: is what we planned, watching what we get, what changes do we need to make, and repeat. Something that
I find looking from the outside in must be such a daily challenge. And, you talk about decision fatigue, but the decisions relating to how to find that minimally effective dose week to week, day to day for your athletes that, all recover in different ways, all need different stimulus. How do you manage X amount of athlete decisions a day? You mentioned, encouraging the athletes to self-manage, but they're still looking for some guidance, obviously. So, how do you try and get that right?
It's a never-ending process for myself, but I think we're lucky again that we're in a position that we have now a history of success. So again, as I said, that gets you the foot in the door in terms of confidence in process, and ultimately in a squad environment. It's great if your training mate is winning the races or is world champion, but you have to see yourself improving if you're going to continue to believe in what you're doing. And I think that's the model of a squad, is every individual feels like they're getting value, feels like they're improving, feels like they're getting attention. And that's what I have to do. So I have a process, paying attention to those things, from training data to feedback to paying attention to how they behave and act in the training environment. And, I think my model is not necessarily to have formal meetings and talking all the time. It's that concept of managing by walking around, managing by paying attention. You can have a meeting walking to breakfast after swimming with an athlete, and they don't feel like they sat down and had a meeting, but you had a meeting. You paid it. It was with intention that you listened to what they say, and what did they think about that swim? How did you feel about that? So I think that's the power of the daily environment when you're in these camp environments, that we have those kind of opportunities all around us to pay attention to how the athletes are doing and to be present in where they're at, and again, it has to be intentional. It's not enough just to show up. It's not enough just to be present. Physically present. We have to pay attention, and ultimately it's asking questions. I think that's how I try to lead, is not give them the answer, but try to ask the right questions. What do they think? How did they feel about the session we just did? What do they think about this session coming up? How do they think they can manage that? And to find that with each athlete. The majority of what we're doing is going to be really similar. We have the same goals. The group is in terms of the type of athlete is pretty narrow. They're all World Series, or they're competing in the top tier of competition. They're all focused on the Olympic Games, more or less, and they're at different performance points, but they have basically the same goals. And the demands of the competition are that they are what they are. They're set externally. So within that, there's maybe a 5% range of differences, and that can be how much history of health issues do they have? What have we learned from their past experience and mine in terms of what the right loading should be for each individual? So the bulk of it is the same, but of course the differences, while small, are really important to get right. So athletes who typically they're not able to run as much or handle as much intensity, so we need to manage that. Maybe some athletes that have a stronger swim background, they might do a little bit different, but not, it could be one session a week difference. Maybe some athletes need to work on some things connected to psychology a bit more than others, such as building confidence through skill work or tactical style training. Where the reason is psychological more than physical. I think those are some of the differences that we find. Could be difference between male, female, but more than that, probably the individual side of the psychology. I think we try to set the environment so that the athletes feel successful in training most of the time. I really tried to avoid the feeling that they failed a training session, which is different than the model of, I suppose, creating challenging situations and building resilience via this way. I really find, again, our process is be consistent over time, do a high volume and frequency of work, and we know if we do that, we're going to be on the start line having been very conditioned and ready to race. And so we take confidence in following that process. But what we don't want to do is take the steps too far or be without discipline and be pushing that extra amount. So that's where we come back to paying attention to each individual and those key decision moments for each one.
Yeah, so that's the overarching goals look quite similar. There's different levels of performance, but in terms of making those decisions, it's taking lots of factors into consideration, like you just shared, Joel. But you mentioned earlier, minimizing risk of injury, and we know that injury prevention is an oxymoron. It's a unicorn. So injury risk minimization. What are the things you rely on to help you try and, I guess, stay in the safe zone, if you like, of loading, where you're building rather than boom busting, which, from the outside looking in, Joel, and you reference your professional team around you, the multidisciplinary approach, you seem to do it very well.
I think what I can control is the training load. So I think athletes have different limitations in terms of how much training load they can tolerate before they have tissue breakdown. I mean, the way that I see it is, if the athletes are training in a higher training load than they can absorb or manage, eventually they'll start compensating in a way that could lead towards tissue breakdown in some way, with hopefully not bone, but it can be, or as ligament, tendon, muscle issues are very common. And so I think about how can I manage that, and I can manage the training load, in particular the training intensity under high chronic load, I think, is where things tend to go sideways. And so this is what I can pay close attention to, is that particularly the amount and type of intensity under fatigue, and when the art of it is how do I get that right. But that's what I'm paying attention to try to avoid breakdowns. And so I have to pay attention with my eyes, an observation about when they might start to look like their biomechanics are changing. It's not easy to see that under load, but that's one of the things I'm trying to do, and just connecting the holistic recovery into the management of that training load. And one of the I think the key roles of Jose, our therapist, Pepe, we really call him Pepe, is how he and I talk about how the athletes are managing. And so I think part of the physical therapy, there's also a psychological therapy in how they come into the treatment environment, what they say about how they're doing, and then obviously what he sees with their body, tightness, tenderness, sensitivity. And we try to connect all of those things to make decisions in the coming days. So if an athlete, maybe they report feeling a bit extra tired or tight in some area, and then the next morning during training, he'll feed that back to me, and we'll incorporate that in what we see in the coming days. So if we can try to anticipate when the athletes are nearing their limits based on what we see and hear and feel, then I think we're more likely to get it right. So I think, again, the summary of how I think about it is we can control the loading, and that's going to be the driver of where we're going to have health or injury problems. Now, again, the athlete can have a different, some athletes can run 100K every week and they have no issues. Some can run 50. We have to know the difference. They're going to have some limitations, and we may or may not be able to change those over time. So we certainly try, through a lot of different ways. And it can be as simple as progression over time, but we know some of their history and what we can see. And again, I think that's where the decision making is using all of those inputs to try to avoid tissue breakdown or indications that we know can lead towards physical injuries in any case.
I think of a great example of that, Joel, under your tutelage and guidance, being the current men's world champion Vincent Lewis, who I'd heard share that his two prior Olympic preparations for London and Rio were both in the lead up hampered by bone stress injuries, and through I guess the approach that you've just shared, looking at the minimal viable dose and things. He's had a fantastic, consistent season and obviously become the world champion and Super League champion and many other things along the way. And, he'd shared that his running volume had dropped from what he was doing. So I guess that's a great practical example of this approach yielding fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. Vince had his training environment prior to coming to us was heavily running focused, and he did a lot of Ks running, and I mean, he was able to handle it for a lot of the time, but then there was some moments where he had these breakdowns. And the funny thing about bone stress is it can sneak up on you. It's difficult to manage. It's not like something that, is a little bit sore and gets gradually worse and worse. And okay, you didn't pay attention and now it's a problem. It can be going from zero to stress fracture, seemingly. And I think, again, I suppose it's one of the value that we try to provide is for somebody like Vince is having some confidence to do a little bit less, and perhaps that was the right formula to find his consistency this year. And again, it's not easy because everyone they want to get better, they want to improve. We there's the feeling that you have to do more and more and faster, and again, I think being able to take a step back from that and what can we do, especially across the three sports. I think one of the evolution of triathlon is how we integrate the training of swim, bike, run. They're not three different disciplines. They're connected every day. And that there's been an evolution in that of how we think about, depending on your history, your background, if you want to get better at swimming, what you do on the bike and run impacts that, and vice versa. If you want to get better at running, what the type of cycle training you're doing, the type of swimming you're doing, the training load you're doing, it all is connected. And the more we can see that and make those connections, the more likely we're going to get that training load right, and for every athlete, it's a little bit different, but it's trying to find what are the things that are going to make the difference for that athlete with that history, and what's the next step for them.
Yeah, what's the next step? And I love that, having the confidence to do less. Wow, I think every athlete on the planet grows in that wisdom, unfortunately, through trial and error, and coaches by the sounds of it. Joel, psychologically, on any given race, at any given major competition, as a coach, you're not always dealing with success. You'll have world champions jumping on the podium. The same weekend, you may have people who have, in their own estimation, underperformed and it hasn't gone to plan. How do you split yourself between being there and being present in both senses?
Yeah, we have an expression with some of my colleagues that there's never a good day in coaching, because if you've got a big group, you can be delighted for the winner of the race or somebody that had personal success, but you inevitably end up focused or thinking about the one where we didn't get it right. And that's where our attention draws to. And I think it's natural in those moments. The one who had success doesn't necessarily need our support in that moment, and it's the one that didn't achieve what they hoped or desired, or those are often critical moments. And it's why I value being present on the ground at races for what didn't happen. Again, the ones that we can share the success, it's great, but being there and available to support in the right way when something didn't happen, I think is really valuable in coaching, and handling that with the right perspective. I see it's one of the ways I see how I don't want to be as a coach is getting emotional in the wrong way, or it's very easy to get in the blame game when things have not gone well. And I think one of the values we can have as coaches and performance leaders is managing disappointment and managing when things don't go well in the right way. And those can often be critical moments in the relationship, and when we see the sort of the dinosaurs of coaching that are shouting at athletes after races or blaming the athletes, and I just think that's not helpful, and that's not the way that we're gonna get better. But I think I'm there for the ones that didn't achieve what they wanted, and to be available in the right way to provide support in those moments.
You're listening to Joel Filliol, Olympic Performance Director for the Italian Triathlon Federation and elite triathlon coach, on this A Coach's Corner episode. If you missed last week's episode, it featured US biomechanist, author, and inventor of the Mobo board, Jay Desheri. Jay shared around why an athlete's feet are so often forgotten, but why and how they are so vitally important for maximising performance and minimising injury risk.
Build skill, right? Build skill, build control, build awareness. It's important for the foot, important for the spine, important for everything. And so, if you're a runner who's having a hard time and people say, "Oh, don't slump when you run so much," like you need to take a look at things that aren't running problems, right? Your posture alignment all day long is critical, right? If you have, some issue recruiting hip muscles, like take time to finish that. And so when somebody says, "Oh, push more at the backside," and you're like, "I have no clue what you're talking about," right? That skill needs to be there so that when somebody gives you a tip, you know what to do. And the more we practice these things, the more we learn. The more we learn, the better you run.
To tune into the full expert edition featuring Jay Sherry, jump over to wherever it is that you enjoy your podcast from, and whilst there, peruse the archives, including other expert editions, such as episode 190, featuring Associate Professor Shona Helson on all things athlete performance and recovery. For now, let's jump back on this Coach's Corner episode featuring elite triathlon coach Joel Filliol. Joel, if you could put one word around your coaching style, what would it be?
I think one word. I mean, I suppose I try to be a leader that provides value. I know that's more than one word, but I want to be valuable to the athletes. I want to feel like I make a difference, and that's my goal, to provide leadership. It's not to do everything for the athlete. It's, I'm not a dictator style coach or an authoritarian coach. It's very much a partnership, but I want to add value, and I need to add value to what they're doing and to make a difference to their performance.
I think that was the segue into my next question for you, which was, what's your definition of a coach? But I think you've encapsulated that there as well. Yeah,
I think we're to provide leadership, and there's different ways to do that, but we show the direction, the guide on this performance process for each athlete.
Yeah, you're the guide, not the hero. I've heard it said. Joel, there's a few listener questions that have come through, and here they are, Joel. So Hassandro asks, how do the athletes stay injury-free, and how do they train polarized, or which model do they use? What's the volume of their training? I guess in many ways you've answered that, but anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, when I was doing a talk for some coaches recently, and so I went into Training Peaks, the platform we use, and I did a sort by intensity zones, and lo and behold, that 90% of our training was easy, or zone 1, if you like, and I think I didn't set out to follow a polarized model exactly, but something about that resonates with me, is that most of our training should be pretty easy. And if you're training a high volume, it tends towards that in any case. But I think that has a ton of value of thinking about, we don't have to go hard all the time. We have to be consistent, and frequency is powerful. And a lot of our training can be very easy. And again, the mistakes we make are going too fast or too intensive most of the time. And so I appreciate that model. I think it's a good way of thinking, and put the brakes on sometimes is the right thing to do to keep improving.
So would that infer that, often the prescription of intensity is, as you referenced, easy or zone 1 aerobic building, if you like, and then it's very much high intensity, in this case the other 10%, without a lot in the middle, or is there still work being done in the middle?
Yeah, I think, in the old days we thought of gray zone training, or, moderate training didn't have value. But I think moderate training has a ton of value, and it has relatively low risk compared to higher intensity. And one of the things, I think I picked it up from Steven Seiler, who was the guide of polarized training in the sports science world, or the one that has promoted it a lot, was this concept of threshold training is toxic. And I think doing too much, essentially what is, toxicity is doing too much makes us sick. And at least in the sense of too much is something that you could struggle to recover from, and then that can bleed into the rest of your training. I mean, you start to lose frequency and volume. So I don't know if I'm attributing that correctly to him, but I like this concept. It resonates with me. Is too much threshold training, or to keep it simpler, even too much race pace training can be one of the mistakes we make, and so dialing that back a bit, I think can help us be more consistent and grow our chronic load over time in a way that's more sustainable.
Yeah, and Dr. Stephen Seiler, I think you'd be fairly right in attributing that to Stephen there, Joel. And on Stephen asks, what percentage of athletic performance is psychological versus physical?
I mean, obviously in endurance sport, you can't, fake your way into it. You have to do the work, the physical work. Of course, there's the old nature versus nurture. The talent part of it, of course, is significant, but at the top end of the sport, the talent is not so different in the ways that we can measure, and therefore, I mean, it comes back to what are the differences between athletes, and a lot of them really do become psychological, but not in terms of necessarily a mental skills or toughness way. I think it's more a bigger picture than that. It's it's decision making, it's real commitment, it's doing what you say you're going to do, walking the talk. In my line of work, so many athletes come to me and say, I want to go to the Olympics, for example, but I don't see them always taking actions and making decisions that are in the same direction as what they say. And even at very high levels, I see a lot of athletes consistently making poor decisions about all kinds of different things. And it both reminds me what I need to try to get right and what our athletes need to get right. But those are all principles of psychology. And again, it's not the traditional way we might think of resilience or sports psychology, quote unquote, but it's about the quality of your everyday decisions, how you handle disappointment, how are you able to be self-disciplined in terms of how you manage your own program, your recovery, are you able to handle setbacks? Those kind of things are all part of the psychological component of sport. And, when I think of why some athletes don't achieve what their potential is, it's often those kind of things that are holding them back. It's self-sabotaging behaviors. It's when in doubt, they push harder instead of when in doubt, leave it out. And, it's those kind of things. Again, it's easy to say, but in the critical moments, how are they handling themselves? How are they managing? Those differences are psychological, and they're skills. They're not necessarily innate qualities. We have to learn how to have those skills and how to recognize how to have those skills and how to grow them. And, that's connected to every day. There's opportunities like that all around us to get better. Again, it's not only training, physical training. So, again, I think to get in the door in high level sport or sport in general, we have to do physical work. We have to be fit and conditioned. But I think the differences between those who are able to be consistently successful are more about how they manage the psychological big picture, all those decisions and all of those factors that enable them to continue to improve.
Yeah, well, so, there's not a percentage per se, but, which you wouldn't expect, but there is very much those qualities which, as you say, they're not innate, they are learned and refined over time. I also observe that in some of the best performers, there seems to be I don't even know what the term would be, Joel, but an intelligence, and I don't mean just academic or IQ, but there's an intelligence, whether it's an emotional intelligence or, there's an aura there's just something about the way that they think. And obviously it makes sense to get incredible output and performance. They have to think different and see the world differently. But can you add anything to my awkward observation?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And that level of sort of sport IQ is different amongst different athletes. Some athletes you come across and you just think this athlete is so keyed into the things that are important and they see so much. I was asked to do a talk on the career of Simon Whitfield a few years ago, and I described somebody like him. When he was racing, but also in probably more importantly in training, he just could see more than other athletes around him. And I don't mean physically see, but he was able to perceive what he needed to do and perceive what was happening around him in another level than many athletes who the world just seemed to pass by them and they couldn't absorb what was happening fast enough. And I like that concept of sport IQ. I think we can learn that, but there are some athletes that seem to they just seem to have an intelligence about them that is a real asset, and they're able to make decisions as a result that are better quality decisions. So I think it's a very good observation, and you know what can we do? We can become students of the sport and encourage our athletes to become students of the sport, and that not just be an athlete, but study how to get better. How can athletes learn? And I think in an endurance sport where we spend so much time in physical training, you know, how many athletes are studying their sport? How much are they learning? Do they know the history? You know, for example, and it can be an asset to know. The history of great athletes that came before you. What did they do? What were they like? What kind of experiences did they have? And how many take the time to do that? You know, some really are students in that way, and so that they're investing in more than just the physical training, and I think it really makes a difference.
I think there's post the Olympic cycle, Joel, there's a book that you need to write. It's called Sport IQ. Joel, finally bringing this conversation into a close, if you could issue just one piece of advice to the listener of this show to help them perform at their own physical best across a range of endeavours, what would Joel Filliol's solitary piece of advice be?
I think if you have a doubt, to not hesitate to change something. You know, for many of them, it can be slow down. You know, I think that you can take that in a lot of different ways, but slow down.
Oh, wow. I mean, yes, we could go so far with that, but that's so profound. Joel, every guest of the show issues listeners with a physical challenge for the week. So what is Joel Filliol's physical challenge going to be?
What I would challenge everyone out there is to, this week in training, put away your devices. Cover up or don't start up your Garmin or your sports watch. Try to do this week by feel and be in tune with yourself, and see what you can learn from that. And I reckon that everyone can find a level of awareness that can sometimes hide underneath all of this data and all of these devices.
Oh, wow, another powerful, so great. Joel, I started this conversation as a kid in the candy store, and I have filled myself right up. My stomach is busting. So, Joel, thank you in amongst your schedule. It's planning for 2020 and the big year it will be. So certainly thank you for your contribution to this show and also to the sport in general of triathlon and beyond. All the best.
Thanks so much, Brad. I really enjoyed the talk and the contributions you make to both our athletes and the sport in general.
So there you have it, another episode of the show. I trust and I know you took so much from Joel Filliol's share-ins. And if you did, then please reach out and let Joel know what it was that you enjoyed or learnt. You'll find Joel easily over on Instagram at Joel Filliol, Filliol, or over on his website, joelfilliol.com. And you can enjoy Joel's teachings furthermore over on Joel's very own podcast, The Real Coaching Podcast on iTunes. Don't forget to keep the podsies coming. That is a screenshot of the episode you're enjoying and tagging in the show at Physical Performance Show. They're always a lot of fun and they really do serve as great fuel to keep the show going live. Talking about fuel to keep the show going live, Thank you for those leaving ratings and reviews over on iTunes, and also for those who have been hitting subscribe to the show. Subscribing really is the best way to help the show grow and get into the earbuds of more people who, just like yourself, are looking to pursue and perform at their own physical best. It is annual feedback time for the Physical Performance Show, and to go into the draw to win a $50 Amazon gift card, we'd love to know what it is that we can do to improve the show, to better serve yourself through the mission of the show, which is to help you pursue and perform at your own physical best. To leave feedback during our annual poll, it's very easy. You can jump over to pogophysio.com/podcast. Whilst there, of course, peruse the show notes, including this episode featuring Joel Filliol. You can also hit the big green button, which simply says, let us know what you think of the show. We're collecting feedback right through until the final episode of 2019, and we'll be announcing the winner of the Amazon gift card during the first episode of 2020. A massive thanks to the great folk who make this show possible week in, week out. Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin on all things show administration, and Matthew Walding on all things show graphic design. Another massive thanks to PhysioCrem for your support of the show. Podcasts, whilst free to download, are not free to produce. So PhysioCrem, thank you for your ongoing support. Thanks once again to the generosity of today's guest, Joel Filliol. What an enormous time ahead Joel has as he coaches the members of his elite professional triathlon squad through to the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. And to keep the continuity, the thread of Joel Filliol's teachings going, we've organised a treat for you, and that is next week's featured performer. It'll be the final episode of the 2019 podcast year, and I'm thrilled to announce that next week's guest is none other than the current male World Triathlon Series champion, Joel Filliol crew athlete, Vincent Lewis. And I had so much fun recording this with Vincent. Here's a little snippet of next week's episode.
People ask me a lot, oh, what are you doing after Tokyo? Are you going long? I'm like, no. I mean, I want to do long if I can actually have someone to fight with. And that's also why I like Super League so much, is that you have so many contact, you have so many adrenaline coming into you, and the fight, it's so hard, and it's sometimes matter of just taking a psychological ascendant on someone, just saying, no, you're not gonna beat me, you're not gonna pass there, you want to pass there, I'm gonna block you, I'm gonna do everything I can to beat you, and I'm gonna make you believe I'm better than you. And that's how it works, and that's what I like. I like a good battle.
So be sure to be tuning in next week to finish the year on a real high, as Vincent shares why it is that he values simplicity in his approach to his training, the journey that he's gone on for the last 11 years from 2008 when he was crowned the World Junior Triathlon Champion through to the culmination of becoming the Senior World Triathlon Champion just recently in Lausanne, Switzerland, to be crowned the 2019 World Triathlon Champion. It's an episode you are not going to want to miss. So until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.